I am here today to talk a bit about white supremacy culture, and specifically, I want us to get into how white supremacy culture shows up in schools. So I'm going to give us a few more minutes to see who else we have joined, and then we're going to get started. And if you're watching this in the future, hey, I hope you're having a great day. And I'm excited to chat and lead some learning with you all today. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. One thing that has really been like weighing on me in my spirit recently is what is white supremacy's culture's role in our schools, right? Like, what is that? Like, and how does it show up? And like, what are the tangible ways, the concrete ways it shows up? And what are we going to do about it? One thing that I'm really working to challenge the educators I work with on a one-on-one and in small groups with is let's move away from we have theory, we can always grow and learn more. But once you have a clear understanding of anti-racism, once you have a clear understanding of anti-bias work, once you have a clear understanding, a concrete understanding of what white supremacy culture is, it's not enough for us to just keep living in knowing. We have to move towards the action. And that's what I hope we can accomplish here together today. So, hi, Jacqueline. Thank you for joining. So let's just start with a quote by Guante. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with him. I had tagged him in a post a couple of days ago. But he has this incredible poem that I was able to stumble upon on YouTube a year or two ago, where he said something that was extremely profound to me. He said, white supremacy is the water, not the shark. So many times, like, and just thinking about that analogy, right? Like, so many times we are taught to be afraid of the scary things, the monsters, the overt ways that harm or violence may show up. And that's what represents that shark. But really, it's all of the covert ways, the hushed ways that, in our case, white supremacy shows up, and it's in the air, it's in the water, it engulfs us before we even know it, and it's carrying us along, right? So using that analogy, it really helps us to just concretize what is the work that we have to do. We don't have to so much be afraid of the sharks, right? We know how to clearly get away from something when it is imminent physical danger. But the work we have to do is start working on the mindsets. And a friend of mine calls it like mind trash, like the things that we believe and we default to subconsciously. And I've been thinking a lot lately about how it's so easy to default to whiteness. And when I say default to whiteness, I'm not speaking necessarily where we automatically like choose to consciously go there, but it is the air we breathe. It's the water around us, right? We go there without even thinking. And specifically today we're talking about fear and how that characteristic of white supremacy shows up in schools. And we can immediately pull out the sharks, right? We can pull out the ways that a teacher or an educator or an adult in a building can be aggressive or scary or overtly out of line, or in my work, racist and biased towards children or their colleagues, right? But what we don't talk about is how the subtle ways fear shows up and how it works in the favor of white supremacy. So, for example, fear works to make us afraid. And when we are afraid, we disconnect, right? Like, we disconnect from ourselves. We disconnect from each other. We disconnect from the world. And when we're disconnected, we're not learning in that space. At least we're not learning in a positive way. We're learning how to survive, how to, make it through that time, through that space. But we're not thriving in that time. And as I've grown as an educator, because some of you may know, you may not know, I am, or I have been, a classroom teacher. I wrapped up my career working in schools in May of this year, and now I'm working full time in my consulting work. But anyway, it's important that I always lead with that, because I'm going to give you all 3 things that you can do to really combat fear tomorrow when you enter your spaces. So the first thing you can do as a teacher and as a leader is co-create. And when I say co-create, a very tangible example that many people are able to connect to is co-creating specifically around the agreements that you follow. Quick note about agreements. Some teachers call them norms. Some teachers may call them rules. Norms and rules, what rules especially have like a negative connotation, because largely rules are things that we're told to do without a why. And to me, norms upholds whiteness just in the name, because it's normal, right? We talk about returning back to normal. When normal for so many children, for so many people, is violent. We don't need to return back to normal. We need to do something new, try something new. So back to that first thing you can do, you can co-create the agreements in which your community operates. You can co-create things like student handbooks. You can co-create classroom agreements. You can co-create dress codes. And by co-creating, you are not only reducing the fear that comes along with maybe not following the rules, or existing outside of what is considered normal or expected in a classroom, because now the young people, the adults in your building, everyone has a buy-in. And in having a buy-in, you move from being disconnected to being connected. And when that community is harmed or there is fear that comes up, you are empowered. And I say you as an educator, you as a leader, even as students, young people, they feel empowered to say, hey, this isn't what we agreed to. Let's do the work of getting back to that. So the first thing you can do is to co-create with your students, your faculty, your staffs, your community, right? Making sure you include them in the decision making so you can ensure that that connection exists. The second thing I'm going to offer up is something that's happening across the country in schools as we're in this back to school season is curriculum night. There are so many young people who grow up to be parents of other young people who have had traumatic and fearful experiences in schools. And when they come to curriculum night, they get all of this information, but they don't feel that they are trusted, included, parts of the community. So that's the second thing I invite you all to do, is when you have curriculum night, don't just tell parents what the kids will be learning. Don't just stand there and speak the whole time. Use that time to bring in that first idea of co-creating. How does curriculum night look for when your families come to visit, right? But also in that space, take time to inform parents of their rights. That was one thing I did every time we started a new school year. Whether or not I had the family or, family friends of children I taught previously, I always started with, these are your rights as a parent. These are your rights as a guardian, as the adult caretaker of this child. And you are just as much a member of this community as myself, as this child, and what you have to say matters. And in doing that, you start to peel back those layers. You start to help that family or help that individual say, you know, I didn't do school like this. I didn't experience school like this. But what I'm going to do is be a part of the effort that this educator is making so that my child or the young person I care for has a different experience in schools. So that's the second thing. First thing, co-create with your stakeholders, including especially the children and the families. Create your community. So bringing that to the curriculum night, that's part 2. On curriculum nights, make sure that you create an environment that highlights that co-creation, but that also helps you or helps families understand their rights and what their role could look like in the community that you're creating in your school, in your classroom. And finally, this one I created specifically for leaders. And it is very much so applied to the teacher-student relationship. But leaders, I want to invite you all to do this third thing. Invite teachers to co-create their professional learning goals for the year and include them in your evaluation and review every step of the way. One of the things that I experienced in all of my years of teaching, I was told what I needed to do to be better by some standard, right? Or to improve. Or there came a point where they were like, you got it, right? Like, you're not a priority on the list of teachers to be coached. And in doing that, one, you divest the person from the process. They're disconnected, right? Also, depending on your school culture and climate, we're talking about fear. In many situations, the person who is observing and evaluating you has some positional power as to whether or not, depending on if you are in a unionized district, there's lots of different factors, but they may have the power to determine if you reach full certification, if you have an offer to teach or work again in that school or in that district the next year. Because leaders hold so much positional power in their buildings, it's so important that you understand, just from positionality, the fear that might come with being someone who is working alongside you or under you, however you visualize the relationship. I hope it's alongside, working alongside you. But there is a positional power that you have in that space. So with all that being said, I hope you all found this helpful. I'm going to be back the next few weeks, moving into September, just going over ways that white supremacy culture characteristics show up in schools and what you can do to shift that immediately in your practice. So thank you all for joining today. And I am going to see you all next week. And if you have any ideas about the characteristic that you'd love to see me cover next week, reach out. I'm happy to incorporate that feedback. Have a good night, y'all.